talked about native people burning the land regularly. We recently found, to our surprise, that one of the major nut crops here, rather than acorn, was hazelnut. Hazel is a fire-responsive plant. It's hard to find now, but they use the hazel for basketry, for medicine, and for arrow foreshafts, and also the nuts themselves. So the landscape that was burned produced, and flowers used to come up in large numbers. They too had seeds that were gathered by the people for food. And there's Ishi, after he'd been living in the Museum of Anthropology for a while, and gaining a little weight, as you can see. But he's teaching the anthropologists how to hunt with bow and arrow. And that is an arrowhead. An arrowhead is like that big. So what people call, people who collect often refer to the little points as bird points. Well, no, those are actually arrowheads. The other points are darts. So there is a technological difference. And they hunted pretty much everything, even bears. We do find grizzly bear in the middens, and you wonder how that worked, because the grizzly bear is omnivorous. They eat everything the people ate, and the people too. And sometimes I find the people ate the bear. So how that worked, we don't know. And we don't think the grizzly bear hibernated here, so they're here all the time. Probably when people are managing the land, you create berry patches for the bears, not just for you, and you direct where they go. So that's a dynamic yet to be explored. Geese, ducks, turtles, reptiles, quail were very important to the diet. We find a lot of those bones in the arc sites. But this is where the real food is. And that is in the grasses and the seeds. You burn these every year. The fire burns quick, not hot. Now our fires are catastrophic because we leave too much fuel. But in the old days, they were cleaning fires. And they would go through these oak woodlands and burn, and the trees responded and produced better acorn harvests. We now call a lot of these oak woodlands orchards because the women were managing them pretty closely. So the acorn crop, the seed harvest, takes about 13 acres of meadow to support a family, and they're harvesting things like tar weeds and clarkia seeds. They're very tiny, so you need a lot of land to harvest those. That's why they're burning every year, to improve the seed harvest. And these are handstones and milling slabs used for milling these seeds into a flour to make food. But most of us are aware of acorns as a big part of the diet. Oh, that's a woman up in Ukiah not too long ago. She's smacking the tar weed with a seed beater and has a cone-shaped baskets to catch the seeds. These people were fiber-rich people, and basketry was extremely important to them. So seeds were important, and then acorn becomes important after 1000 BC as population pressure forces that need. The thing about acorns is they're toxic. They have a high handling cost to process. And you need a large toolkit to do it. And you harvest the acorns in the fall, and you put them in a granary next to your village. That means you give up your mobility, and now you're tied to the cycle of acorn. And that's what happens. And as they do, we start seeing larger village communities. To make acorn, what a woman was ready to do, and women did do the food preparation, these are gender-ascribed people. They're not like we do, as though one is superior to another. They see it as a balance, but they had distinct roles that each played to keep the health of the community. When women make food for their family, they have to be spiritually centered, because they believe their thoughts go in the food that their family eats. So that's a very different thing than we're busy from work and I'll get something frozen and throw it in the oven. You know what I mean? A different attitude. To make acorn, you gather them up from the granary and you split them and pull out the meat. Notice these designs? They're not painted on, they're woven in by different plants. And we'll see a little of that. So the next step then is to pound the acorn in your Cuisinart. And the Cuisinart tool are these mortars. And the women make these by pecking the rock with a hard rock and shaping them. This is a pestle, and you can see the little pecking scars all over it. Sometimes they made beautiful bowl mortars. And in these mortars, they would pound the acorn into a flour and make it into a powdery form. That's what's happening. Here's the Yokits woman from Los Banos area. And she's pounding the acorn. There's a soap root brush. The fiber of the soap root is used to make these whisk brooms. I have a bunch of these at home. People still make them. And then you have to take the acorn meal. It looks like polenta. This is a woman from Yosemite, the Alanichi people. And what you do is you put it in this sieve tray. It's about this big. I have this one at home. and you shake it back and forth, and the coarse particles separate, and you put the coarse particles back in the mortar to process it further, because you're not feeding your family lumpy acorn meal. Okay, so the next step then is to take the tannic acids out of it. To do that, they make a depression in the ground, line it with wild grape leaf, sometimes poison oak leaf, and put the powder on top, and they pour boiling water over it and leach it out. How do they boil the water? They didn't have any pottery or metal. Well, the women wove grass baskets so tight, they swelled when they were wet and became watertight. Hard to imagine. And then they would boil water. This is Essie Parrish. She was the last shaman of her people at Fort Ross. She died in 1985. I knew her. She's buried in the roundhouse, and it's still locked. She was the last dreamer. She said there are no more dreamers now. She was the last of the medicine women there. In any case, she's telling the anthropologist how it was done. And that's a beautiful basket, by the way. Those designs are, that black is maidenhair fern. So in any case, she's made this big depression, putting the acorn meal in it. Now I have to pour the boiling water over. In this scene, you see that happening. This woman is getting white-hot rocks from the hearth, dips it in the first basket, whoosh, takes the ash and dirt off, puts it in the second basket. Whoosh, that's where the hot water is. Then you ladle it out over the acorn meal and leach it. That brush is to break the impact of the water. You end up with this soupy kind of porridgey stuff. And a lot of my students who've tried acorns, I say, have you ever eaten acorn? They go, mm-hmm. And you like it? They go, mm-hmm. But in reality, it's not the way you eat it. You're supposed to add things to it. It's like giving somebody a baked potato with no butter. You know what I mean? So everything goes in the acorn meal. Berries, sea mammal fat, insects, all of that stuff. Sometimes red earth, because it's iron rich. You get a supplement, vitamin supplement. They can make breads and cakes out of it. And sometimes the acorn harvest fails. Nature isn't always stable. Then you can use buckeyes as plan B. They don't preserve that well, but they're also toxic and need to be processed similarly. So all of that is going on. All the berries you can imagine are food. You get surplus berries and you throw them in the Cuisinart mortar, pound them up into a paste, lay them out on the rocks, they sun dry, you make fruit roll-ups out of those, right? So all the berries were food. And then soap-root is another staple. The most common archaeological feature I find are discharged ovens of hot rocks, burned rocks. Because the women did this communally. They would go into the meadows with long digging sticks, and they would socket these donuts on the end for weights, and they'd pry up the turf and pull out the bulbs. Picture that going on, women and the young girls, generation after generation, for thousands of years, they're tilling the land. It's aerated, and it produces, I still find Indian gardens on a landscape where you get high densities of soap-root and brodia as bulbs. That's potatoes for them. So the soap-root is gathered, and these bulbs have this fibrous material that makes those dandy whisk brooms. The bulb itself is toxic. You have to cook it in the ground, luau style, for 36 hours. So you do that communally. I've done that with my Ohlone friends. We pulled them out of the campfire once because I told them how to do it. I'd never done it. Come home to camp one day because we're working together, and they're digging up the campfire. What are you doing? I said, well, you said we could eat these things because they're rediscovering their own culture, right? And we ate them. I know, I read this. And so we open it up, right? And they taste like yams. They're really good. Surprise. And they're growing all over the meadows right now. So soap-root also makes a lather. They used it as a shampoo, hence the name soap-root, to clean their hair. They used the whisk brooms for cleaning baskets. You pound it up in still water, it takes the oxygen of the water, and the fish float up. Fishing game isn't approved. But at any rate, you can eat the fish with no ill effect. So it's just one of so many plants. And I use it as an example, therefore, to speak of the diversity in the diet. Native people had a more diverse diet than agricultural people do, which is why their population plummets in the missions, because their health and hygiene and everything changes for them. Insects are also a big part of the diet. I know, right? All my students are like, yeah, roasted grasshoppers. You would burn the grasslands in fall, harvest lots of grasshoppers, and they're roasted. And you don't eat the head, you eat the thorax, pretty buttery. Yeah, and then sometimes you get shish kebab caterpillars. These are army worms, right? You can't see them in the bush. I learned from the Pomo up in Mendocino County. The women sing to the bush. And they hit a certain syllable, the worm vibrates. And then you can harvest them. Right? Shish kebab caterpillars. I know. And everybody goes, you. And I always bring this up. Next time you eat a shrimp, take a long look at that thing. So it is kind of culturally defined.
You can buy cricket pattern commercially now.
Yeah, you can do that. But when I was younger, that was like, no. Now it's considered cuisine. Right? Anyhow, basketry takes years of preparation. You just don't harvest materials. You have to burn the ferns years in advance and prepare them so the bunch grass, the deer grass, all requires fire so you get better shoots that are stronger. So gardening is a constant process. This is a friend of mine, Kathleen Smith, in the sedge marshes. We have sedge here too. It grows a long rhizome, and she'll pull out the root and lay it nice and straight in the ground, come back 3 years later to harvest it for basket. So basketry is a continuous preparatory cycle. We can't imagine. The baskets are beautiful. These are from the Central Valley because there are only 18 Ohlone baskets we know of. Most are in Russia in that book we were just talking about. And I shamelessly scanned it, so I'll show you a couple. In any case, these designs are what I'm pointing at because they mean things. So it's a form of symbol for the native people. Women dream these designs. They start the basket from the bottom out, and they have to be perfect. Every stitch is a prayer, and when they're not right, or they're on their moon time, that's a special time, women, when they're on their monthly cycle, are spiritual. It's interesting, Native people see women as inherently spiritual. Men are not. We have to go through rituals. That's the difference. So this is a typical family household basket assemblage. Seed beater baskets, filter trays for making Kool-Aid out of toyon berries, interior storage baskets, serving bowls, your plates, and cooking baskets. Look, you're dropping those hot rocks in. Look at the designs. Nobody sees that. This is strictly an expression of art. Very complex. These, that's a basket I took a picture on. It's from the Smithsonian. It was at Santa Clara for a while. And notice it has shell beads all over it. Because this is not a cooking basket. This is a wealth object. The rich marry the rich. Surprise. And you know what? You need something to bring to the table. And so wealth objects are part of the dowry for marriage. This basket is missing something. It used to be fluorescent red because they take the acorn woodpecker and pileated woodpecker scalps that are bright red, peel each individual down feather off, and put one in each stitch. So this used to be a feathered basket. Time has taken the feathers off, and they take the plumes of the quail and line the tops of the basket with these quail plumes. Quite beautiful. The only people who make feathered baskets now are in Mendocino, and they're all ducks and geese because the other feathers are felony feathers, right? This is the one from Russia, and look at the beauty. It's got abalone pendants hanging off of it and olivella beads. They're beautiful. There's another from that book, and you can see what we're missing here. Shell beads were money, as I mentioned, and the coin changes through time. They cut different parts of the shell to make a bead, and where they take it from gives it different thicknesses and curvature. And I'm studying 8,000 of these beads right now from Mission Santa Clara. These are the oldest coins on the planet.
How did they cut the shells?
They fracture them in special ways with a stone. First they bake them to make them white, because money has to be uniform. Then they smack them in a certain way to get a fracture out of it. Then they grind them on a slab of rock, and with a stone-tipped drill bit, like an arrow, twist it back and forth, you bore a hole through it. Labor. In my classes, I'll hold up a $10 bill. I go, what's this? The students are smart. They say, it's $10. And I go, no, it's a rectangular piece of paper. We just give it that value. At least these guys are making real things, right? So we found, when we built Highway 101, it was my first dig in San Jose, Highway 101 didn't connect until 1980. Used to be farm fields, used to have to take Blood Alley to Monterey Highway. At any rate, we found 5 archaeological sites. In one, we dug 8 meters deep. That's pretty damn deep, like 24 feet. In these small units, it was stupid. Anyhow, 5 meters deep, we found a hearth. And in the hearth was a rabbit bone and an olivella. We dated them, and they both came out to 7,400 BC. So remember, that olivella shell has no dietary value at all. And I've got them going into Mission Santa Clara, where they're using iron needles as the drill bits. And so what you see is the oldest coinage on the planet, right here. I like to say that, because it's true. So shell beads change in time. Like these are from a cemetery site in San Jose, and they're all rectangular with a hole in the middle. They were not strung on necklaces at all. We found them on the individuals like sequins. They were tied to a fabric. And we called them sequin beads because they were overlapped like shingles on each other. And what was the fabric? We'll never know. It doesn't preserve. Pendants were not used for jewelry. They're badges. When you get pulled over by a highway patrolman, and I'm sure that never happens, but you know what you're dealing with because he's got chevrons on, he's got a bunch of badges and stickers and all kinds of logo gear. He's saying who he is, right? That's what these serve as, because in each village, you strive to be a member of a social group in the community. And membership was ascribed over a lifetime, and you had to pay dues with shell beads to be a member of a group. And each group had its own costumes and outfits and ceremonial events, which creates a calendar for the village. And so we see different abalone pendants. These are my favorite. They're called big head pendants because it's like a little man. They're the representation of a religious movement that starts in the Bay Area and moves out in California. It's called kuksu. It's still being practiced in Northern California, where they go into a big dance house, it's semi-subterranean, and they got a guy with a huge feather headdress on, and he's the spirit, and he's emulating the gods, if you will, the spirit world. So I've been to these dances, and that's the kuksu right there. This is fabulous. You know, this is old California. You're looking at a guy with a turban with radiating rods coming out, and goose down and eagle down feathers. He's got his clapper sticks there, abalone pendants, and bird bone whistles hanging from his neck. That's old California. And that's the dance house. We have one of these in state parks in the Sierra Nevada foothills called Chase. You can go there in September and camp with the Indians. You won't get any sleep because the Miwoks are doing ceremony. The Paiutes are coming up to gamble. And gambling is noisy. You know, traditional gambling with sticks and guessing games. I've lost my shirt playing those games. In any case, so this is a large dance house. You can see they're architecturally impressive. You know, it's hard to cut wood like that with stone axes. So these are dancers. What they're wearing is aprons made out of milkweed net, milkweed fiber net, and they tie hawk feathers and eagle feathers to them. These are bandoliers made out of flicker feathers. They're bright orange. And they take only 2 feathers from each bird, the tail feathers. So how many birds do you need to make one of those? Quite a few. And this is the anthropologist saying, show me how it was done. And the Indians don't like it because it's illegal. Native American religion was outlawed in the United States until an act of Congress called the Native American Religious Freedom Act of 1976 permitted it. Whistles made out of eagle, heron, hawks, condors, geese. At the Filoli estate, one guy had 123 of these whistles. That's unprecedented. Who was that guy? Somebody special. So whistles are kind of monotonal, but they use them in ceremony. These are rattles made out of the cocoon of ceanothus moths. They throw out the larvae, they put pebbles in there, cover it with feathers, and they're as loud as baby rattles. So picture 100 dancers going shh, 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 shh. The clapper sticks, the bird bone whistles. It's mesmerizing. And there's an apron, and I wanted to show you that because here's the milkweed fiber. How do you get that many hawk feathers? You go behind the house to the hawk feather pile? You know, you got to get the bird. To get the bird, you have to be spiritually centered because for these guys, religion is a real thing. And you have to be spiritually pure to get the bird, to make this regalia. And I flipped this over because these red stitches, no one sees that. That's the formula. They're not putting on a show. It's not a mask for you to look at. They're changing themselves to become holy. When they wear this stuff, they're transforming themselves. Because spirituality is the real deal for these guys. Here you see the flicker feather headbands being made, edge to edge, very valuable in Native California society. And again, they just took the 2 tail feathers from each bird. I once asked one of my Ohlone friends, why did you pick that bird? And he says because they're family birds. You ever seen acorn woodpeckers? They're always in groups. They're families. These are Ohlone men from the Louis Cherry artist from 1816 of here, up the road. And these are the men from Mission Dolores. They're painted with red cinnabar from the New Almaden mines in San Jose. which they valued very much, the red paint. They've got their flicker feather headbands, magpie headdresses going up, and bone pins to hold the whole thing on their head. My Ohlone friends, the Amalutsun of today, have reorganized, and we are working with them to bring them back into parks. And that's what we saw yesterday. We had a meeting about that to teach others that that they're alive and well. They posed for an artist. This is a piece of a painting that is about as long as this wall, and it hangs at UC Santa Cruz. I advised the artist, and my Amalutsun friends posed for this, and I jibed them because they're wearing breech clouts, which they didn't wear in those days. And they said, well, we're not going to pose like that, for this artist, which kind of cracks me up. Excuse me, I'm trying to get rid of that thing. These are elk pins, there's the milkweed fiber nets, and the magpie headdress. So, the real colors are much better than those black and white images. These are belts made out of dog bane, feathers, and tiny shell beads. They're all in Paris. We don't have any of these. They're in the Museum of Man in Paris. Shamanism. They had doctors, they had priests, and they had sorcerers. Each one has a role to play in society. And we see their images in paintings and carvings on rocks. Most of the time you don't see anything at all because shamanism takes place on the landscape in holy places. They don't always put an altar up for that. And regular villagers don't go to those places. They're power spots only for specialists. The landscape, the silhouette of a hillside would trigger stories. The landscape is text for the native people, and they read it, and it reminded them of places. That's a Chumash shaman. That's braided eagle feathered or eagle down. These guys are powerful. They know how to poison people and how to heal them. They were kind of dangerous in society, actually. Tobacco was smoked, but not like we do. They grew two kinds of nicotiana. They mixed it with seashell to give it a narcotic kind of kick. Not very strong, but strong for our tastes. And they sculpted stone tobacco pipes and put the tobacco in and put glowing embers up, and they blew the smoke as men in the sun. And I know because the Europeans coming up meet them near here, and the Europeans have tobacco and the Indians have tobacco, and they're giving each other samples, saying, try this. It's kind of like today. Anyhow, so they never smoked for recreation because they believed the smoke coming from your body was a prayer to God. So you only smoked for prayer. These are charm stones. Shamans use these as part of the healing process. You heal the mind as well as the body. So a lot of ritual goes with that. They sculpt these plummets. They have tar on them with cordage imprints, so we know they were suspended. And we don't know a lot about them because the shamans weren't telling us that. It's secret. And then we find things like this on the landscape. Along Skyline, we find what are called cupule rocks. These are tiny holes, and they're pecked in by the shamans. We used to think that that was a sacred rock. But you know what? This is the confetti on the street after the parade has already left. What they're doing is they're pecking the holes to get the powder out. The powder becomes an application on their body for power. Paints, cinnabar. They traded cinnabar far and wide. The great cinnabar lines were in New Almaden. That's also where the mercury comes from. So red paint was very important for the people. And we find there are sacred places like in Tassajara. I've mapped out some cave paintings there that have a lot of handprints. Because that's where young boys were initiated into manhood. They went there with the sorcerer who gave them an infusion of datura, which is a hallucinogen, very dangerous, as I tell my students. It will kill you, but the shaman knows how to dose the young boys, and they go through altered states of consciousness, and while they're in that stage, the shaman is telling them how to be proper men. Be good men, don't cheat, love your wife, don't rob anybody, be a good person. And when they come out of that altered state, they're now men. And they have to stay that way. They're no longer boys. So in our society, you end up in jail. All right? You don't have any guides. And so all of this comes to a crashing halt in the year 1770 with the advent of Spanish colonization. From the start, the two cultures are conflicted. They have different ways of looking at the world. And there we see a great tragedy occur because the Europeans are not concerned about adapting to native ideology. The natives have to adapt to European. Because the Europeans are trying to recreate this only society they know here. And societies of Europe at the day were ruled by monarchs. You had kings and queens, royalty, aristocrats. Then you had a middle class, the merchants, right? And then you had the low caste, the farmers and the fishermen. They were called peons, right? So Spain's method of colonization was to grab the native people, put them in the missions, convert them into men of reason. The goal was to make them colonists. They needed the Indians to be the colonists of the New World because there was not enough incentive for people to come from Mexico to colonize here. So the Indians were not here to be erased. They were here to be adopted and converted. The problem is in the missions they die because of introduced diseases they've never met before. Also, the women are put into monjerias because the priests learned that marriage was the means of alliance and networking. So they would lock up the women for like 19 hours a day. Hygiene was not so good, and the women died. And the soldiers preyed on them because they have the keys. And so we see infanticide begin and the collapse of the people. And so it's a progressive process, and the people do live because the missions go on for 50 years. Outside the other end of it, we get the Mexican period after the Mexican Revolution, 1821, and the Mexican government opens up all the land for settlement because the missions owned all the property and trust for the Indians. That doesn't pan out. So here we see a shaman's painting that they could read, and here's a mission painting from San Miguel. We can't read this, they couldn't read that. Because what you see here, you see the Archangel Gabriel with wings standing on the heads of babies. Try explaining that, right? So you can see right away there's this dichotomy going on of ideology. It's not going to go so smooth. These are Indians at Mission San Jose, dressed up for dance. The Padres tried to suppress a lot of this, but not all. I'm learning more and more that the native people had a lot of latitude in the mission while they were still maintaining traditional identities there as well. This is another Louis Chori painting at Mission San Francisco, and you can see the men are dancing and the priests, because the French were there and they said, put on a show for these guys. And so we get this beautiful painting displaying, these are the people from here, up and down the coast, dancing for the Europeans to show them. They have staves. The Europeans say these guys always had these large walking sticks that were red. So you get a little insight into the native culture. With the Mexican Revolution, the Indians are now turned loose from the missions. Guess what? They are the caballeros and vaqueros in the great rancho period here. There were large ranches here. I didn't have time to provide some of those notes. I was asked to provide them. But you guys probably have heard of Corral de Tierra. There was Half Moon Bay here is another ranch. Some of these guys would get 18,000 acres at a pop. Do you think that these Mexican landlords are doing the cattle ranching? It's the Mission Indians that are doing this. They don't disappear. They become the labor force, the caballeros and the vaqueros. Consequently, when the gold rush comes and the greatest migrations of humans in history happens, they're invisible because we take the Spanish lands, the Mexican lands, and the Indians on it. So those are the descendants I work with today. Mexican law in 1832 broke up the large mission estates and made them into private land holdings, and the Indians become adapted. They're still here. Landscape changes as the cattle runs wild. Mexico opened up its ports to Europeans, which Spain did not, generally. And so we see that the landscape begins to change. The grizzly bear is extirpated, although Juan Bendico, up by Skyline and Alpine Road, complains about losing cattle in 1887 to grizzly bears. So there are still holdouts in these mountains. And so Americans and British people come in for the leather goods, and you have a Swiss immigrant named John Sutter who gets a land grant to the interior of California. At the same time, the Mormons are going through a diaspora because the U.S. Army is attacking the Mormons in Utah, and they spread out. Some of them go across the Great Basin, come over the Sierras, drop into John Sutter's fort, which he created. It looked like the Foreign Legion out there, four-cornered fort. He's got the Miwoks marching around with wooden rifles. It's like Marlon Brando in Apocalypse Now, right out there. His own empire. And he hires this guy named John Marshall to build a sawmill in the Sierra foothills on the Feather River. The idea was to create a flume, a channel for the water that would turn a wheel that would cause the saws to go up and down. But you know what? The flume get jammed with gravel. So he's scooping out the gravel going, dang, and what does he see? Big gold nugget. Does he keep his lips? No, he goes to Monterey. The big harbor says, I found gold. And it goes out to sea. It triggers one of the greatest migrations in human history. Prior to the Mexican-American War in 1846, there was a census done on the Mexican population. 5,600 Mexican citizens. The first year of the gold rush, you got 100,000 miners show up. Then there is no law, there is no order, there is no government. And the first thing they do is they swarm Sutter's Fort. They take over all the missions because they have orchards and they get fruit and stuff. So immediately the Mexican citizens are thrown out, even though we signed a treaty with Mexico saying we wouldn't do that. The ink wasn't even dry when gold was discovered 6 days later. In any case, everything's unglued. And so people leave their ships there and they move on, not the best representatives of society, and they begin to hunt Indians because it becomes more profitable to sell Indian scalps, which are $5 a piece, than it was to find gold. And they start selling children because the children were marketable. You murder the parents and you sell the kids. So when we become a state in 1850, the first laws we pass are laws of genocide. We passed a law, you can look this up, called the Indentured Servitude Act. It legalized the sale of children. And we also forbid Indians from testifying in court. They were not citizens of the United States until 1924. Same year women get to vote. So we see a trauma, a historic trauma. The people I work with live with that, and I'm aware of it. When I teach our docents in parks, I remind them to have a little sympathy and taste, because some of the kids in those school groups are Ohlone kids. They may be your neighbors. You know, they're still here. They don't have land, but they are here. And their kids go to public schools, and they learn what the teachers teach them, and they take it home. They say, guess what I learned in school today? And the parents go, what? You know, and then we hear about it, right? So it's a cycle that is very real. Educating and museums become very important for getting the story straight because they are still here. So I bring that up because it is something that's a challenge to us all. The historic trauma that went on here was very brutal. California has the most brutal history of all. Slavery was practiced here through the Indentured Servitude Act 12 years after the Civil War. It continued. Lots of money to be made. There's this one guy who made $16,000 selling Indian kids. And the judge called him to court, to testify. How did you make so much money? He said, well, I was selling these orphan children. He said, how do you know they were orphans? He said, I killed the parents myself. And that was acceptable. He was exonerated. Yes?
When you said you could get $5 for an Indian scalp, what was the marketplace? I don't understand.
The government. So the state would reimburse them for this. We were out to eliminate Native people, and we paid vigilante groups in 1852 $1.2 million for the cost of their bullets for their expeditions. This is history. This is not Mark making up a story. Sometimes people talk about revisionist history. How about real history, right? And I teach this because unlike other countries where they don't let you talk about things like this, we can learn. We can become better than that.
So the state authorized the murder of the...
Yes.
And they were getting paid for
yes. $1.2 million in 1852 alone. They asked the federal government for support, which the federal government did, and sent soldiers in forts. Fort Tejon, Fort Humboldt, Fort Cronkite. Those are military garrisons to protect the Indians. Well, that's not what was going on at all, but I don't have time for this. So I just want you to know that that was what was operative in the early days. So people have had a long trajectory and became invisible to us because they didn't want to say they were Indians. Most of the tribal people I know had to identify as Spanish because they didn't want to be persecuted. And that continued until the 1960s when we had the civil rights movement take over and the Native American rights movements come in. And that's why the Native American Religious Freedom Act was passed in 1976. It didn't become a felony to dig up Native American graves until 1990. And that affects me as an archaeologist, right? Just to let you know. But I think this is important. The key thing is persistence and perseverance. And that's the story they want us to tell. They don't want to live in the past. They want to live with their identity now. And so those are the people I work with. In California State Parks, we own a lot of landscape, my goal is to bring the native people back to the land, and we've been doing that. 2009, I created a 220-acre cultural preserve called Coastside Valley, and that's where we're allowing native people to practice traditional land management. You know, it's a funny word, we're allowing. You know, most people think about Indians, they think casinos, right? Casinos. Do you know you had to vote to allow them to do that, right? We still control them. They were drafted in World War I and sent overseas to the trenches of Belgium, even when they weren't citizens of the United States. Native Americans have contributed the largest proportion of veterans of any ethnic group in the United States by percentage. I bring that up because we have a lot to, you know, to give them credit for. So the native people are still here. These are the Ohlone. I give permit for gathering things in parks. The Indians go, why do I get a permit? I say, it's not to control you, it's to remind us that we have this purpose to bring you back to the land, because that is where the beauty is. And we're trying to learn how to manage the land through the traditional lore. If you want to know more about plant management, look up a book called Tending the Wild by Kat Anderson, Kat with a K. It's a UC Berkeley publication. You can get it on Amazon. I use it as a textbook in my class. Tending the Wild. So we learned that we have to manage the land, and we're trying to do that. Our parks are now starting to burn, landscapes more, trying to recover traditional knowledge. And we're doing that with the native people, hand in hand. So things are getting better. And that's the end of my talk.
Just, I know, talk about burning the land and all. Of course, here, up in Corral de Tierra up in Montera, they're using Roundup
Right.
to get rid of the grasses.
So at Coastside
And
Valley,
bringing back the historic.
yeah, well, I'll tell you what, at Coastside Valley, the tribe is trying to manage, we got acres of poison oak in there now. I first surveyed that in the 80s when it was alfalfa, right? Then it went wild, because we took that out. The Doug firs are growing like weeds, you know, and it's eliminating grass on habitat. So we proposed, well, we could, you know, go in there with some Roundup and take it down, because the Indians are going in with loppers and things, and like, and they will not allow us to poison the land.
Good.
So what we've done now is we just got a grant. We're buying what's called a masticator. It's a big mowing machine. We're going to mow down some of that stuff and get it to a base level so they can manage it, right? There's other ways, right?
Yes.
We can't burn it either because there are residences at the canyon. It's not fire defensible. So there are things that we'll never reconstruct. We're never going to bring back that environment again. But we can learn to manage it, because it was always being managed. It was never a wilderness. Yeah?
Perhaps I missed it at the beginning, but how did they create the fire to burn the fields and for the acorns, you know, put the baskets?
So to make fire, they use a twist drill. They get a hearth of wood that's sort of punky looking, and they carve a hole in it, drill a hole in it, and make a little notch on the edge of the wood. And you seat another drill stick in there and go back and forth. It takes a lot of upper arm strength. And you create an ember that goes through that notch and drops into a nest of cattail fluff, and you know, blow on it really crazy and start smoking like crazy. I have a friend that can do this, and in my classes, we do it at college, and the students, it's the best part, we'll burn the college, you know. So we have to be outside when we do that, because it's really smoky. They learned to make bundles and nests with embers that they could carry around. And there were times of the year you couldn't get fire. You know, the highest mortality rates are in the dead of winter, you know, needless to say. Any other questions? Are we all cooked? We look pretty done, huh? Pretty good. All right, thank you. My pleasure.